everyone, and welcome to today's how-to. This is something I get asked about an awful lot, so today I'm going to show you how I create a digital image from my finished pastel painting. And now there are several reasons you might need a digital image if you want to make high quality prints from your work. This is one of my prints. Or if you want to display your work online, on your website or on social media. And there are a couple of ways that I make my digital image. My favourite way is with a flatbed scanner, which I'll show you in a moment. But I'll also show you how you can get a good quality photograph. So I hope you enjoy the video, and please subscribe if you haven't already. Lots more new videos coming soon. So the first method I'm going to show you, and this is my favourite way to get the digital image, is to use a flatbed scanner. I find just that the quality of the image you get is so much better than photographing. And I got this A3 scanner on eBay, I believe, a couple of years ago for around 200 to 250 pounds sterling, that is. And this was a second-hand refurbished model, and it has served me very well ever since. And I'll just quickly show you how I handle the pastel painting. With pastel, as long as you're quite gentle with it, you can put it face down in a scanner and it won't damage it. I always recommend if you bring your piece to someone else to scan, please insist that you handle your own work. I've had a few scary moments with someone else taking my work and putting it into their scanner. So always take responsibility for your own work, and you know that you will be very gentle with it. So I usually like to remove the lid, just takes it out of my way. And I mean, sometimes I end up taping this little thing down just to keep it out of the way. To be honest, I've scanned in pieces as large as 40 inches wide using this, and I tend to scan things in pieces and then join them later on in Photoshop, which I'll show you a bit later. But for this piece, it will take 2 scans to fit this in. So just by laying it down very gently, lining it up top and bottom. And it's quite simple afterwards to join this in Photoshop very seamlessly. And then just take it out, flip it around. Really, I find the scans work out the best. I get such a high resolution image, and that's great for making high quality prints from. And that's it. So here I've got my 2 scanned images, and I'm going to show you how I can join those together. So first I can rotate this. Then I want to make the canvas size big enough to accommodate the whole piece. So make this wider. If I want to move that layer, I've got to unlock it. And I can drag that across. You can see how nice and straight the edges are. I can get the full piece when I scan. Then I'm going to select and copy the other half and paste. So I want to drag this somewhere close. Then when I zoom in, I can fine tune that. A good tip is to make this layer invisible for a second, then you can really see where you need to move. So this needs to go across a little, and that's pretty close there. But you're always going to see a hard edge running down here, so I want to get rid of that hard edge. So ideally get rid of this edge, so I can select. Then a great tool here is to feather it. Anything above 30 is great for this. then when I make sure I have the right layer selected, then I delete that. Now when I add that back in, it's much better. So you can see that's pretty seamless. Then I want to crop it. And if you hold Control at the same time as you're moving this, it lets you really fine tune it. And this is obviously Photoshop I'm using. There are some other free programs. I'll put a list of everything I've used for this entire process in my description. And just a little more off the bottom. But you can see that I get pretty much the whole image without losing any of those edges, which is great. So even when I scan, it never comes in quite how my original appears to me, so I often do a few extra tweaks. I'll first of all flatten this so that it's one layer and I can edit that all together. And if you go into adjustments, you can tweak your brightness and contrast. Sometimes I'll up the contrast a little, not by too much, but I just find the scanner sometimes does make them look a little flatter. And you can do a lot of other adjustments too, but I tend to find that the scanning method doesn't need too much adjustment, and I think my finished image after a few tweaks, and I always have the original piece right beside me as I do this, which is useful, and this was my finished JPEG, and I just want to show you, this is it in full size, and I just want to zoom right in on some areas. This dot in particular is about as small a dot as I can make with a tiny piece of white pastel, and you can really see how crisp those lines are. I'll do a comparison later on to the photo version, and this is why I love the scan, because I've scanned this at 300 dpi, and you can see so much detail, every single grain of pastel on there, and even the lovely texture of the velour paper I use. So the scan gets a big thumbs up from me. If I just go into image size, so here we've got, this is pretty close to the original size of the piece itself, and it's at 300 pixels per inch. So this would be the version I would use to print from. There are two things you need to know about getting work printed. If I'm sending this to a printer, I'll want to go into image mode and change it into CMYK color. So that's cyan, magenta, yellow and black. And these are the colors that printers read from. So if you have your image in RGB, that's how we view it on a computer screen or television. But to get your work accurately printed, you need to provide them with a version of your piece in CMYK color. And just click OK to convert that. So it doesn't look any different to me here, but this makes a big difference when you send it to your printer. I would often send them both the RGB file and a CMYK file, because then they've got something to look at on screen, and they can make extra tweaks if needs be. This is how I do it with my printer. The next thing you'll want to save your file for maybe is for social media posts. So back into image size. I tend to keep this at no more than about 900 if I'm posting online, and you can see that that brings the size down to 3 by 2 inches. So if anyone tries to copy your work from a social media site, they're not going to be able to print it at very high quality. So I often find this is fine as a post on Instagram or Facebook or somewhere like that. So it brings the quality significantly down. You can see the blur. So it wouldn't really be worth printing from. So I save 3 versions of my work usually. The first one being the print version, and second being social media, this one. And you can go a step further if you're uploading to a blog and you're trying to save space on there. and you can go save for web, and this will decrease the size even further. It just compresses it a bit more, and it's absolutely fine for posting onto your own blog or website. So I'll just show you the 3 files saved in here, and this is the print version, and you can see here this is 9.4 megabytes. The social media version, that's around 300-400 kilobytes usually, and for on my blog to save space, usually in around 100 to 150 kilobytes. So as well as scanning, you can also take a photograph of your finished piece, and really you just want to have your piece on an easel or something that will keep it steady, and ideally have your camera placed on a tripod. I often just use good daylight for this, but you can use a daylight lamp, or you can also buy some of these studio lights. They're really cheap, maybe about £30 or £40. And I'm really only using them today for the purposes of filming, as I often find daylight works great. The great thing about a pastel painting is there's no glare off the surface, so you're not dealing with any shininess. They photograph really well. So you get your camera set on the tripod, line it up, make sure that top and bottom are nice and straight, and also make sure that the camera is at the same tilt as the piece. So just square it up nicely. And that's it. I can take this into Photoshop and do some adjustments, and I'll show you what that looks like. So now I've got my photograph opened in Photoshop, and first thing I'm going to do is crop it. And you can see the slight curve, so I am going to lose perhaps a little off the edges. I'm just going to crop it down a little first, and I can tweak this a bit more. You can probably take a bit longer lining it up than I did, but I find it's never too bad. Often I paint a little extra at the edges, as when you frame it, a little bit of the painting sort of disappears behind the edge of the mount. And I'm just going to augment this ever so slightly so I don't lose quite as much off the top. And again, if you hold control at the same time, you can be much more precise. And you can be much neater with this than I'm being as well, just quickly to show you. But that's not bad. Then I want to do a little bit of colour work. Depending on how good a photographer you are, how good your camera is, you may get a better result than me. But what I like to do is use the curves tool. And I know, having my piece beside me while I do this, that the mid-tones are a good bit darker and perhaps a little less contrast in the dark tones. So these are just a few adjustments that I'm used making. I don't often take photos of my work. I prefer the scan method, but when I have to, this works fine. And I can tweak a little more at that, but it's perfectly fine. I'm just going to show you when I zoom right in. So again, this is at 300 dpi, and it's not bad for just pure daylight with a 12 megapixel camera. So you can probably get much better results if your camera's got a higher resolution than mine, but this is perfectly fine. I'd be happy to use this. The only downside is I couldn't really use it to make a bigger print from, but that's not so important. I'll just do a little quick comparison between this and the scanned version. So you can see it's much more crisp. And the colours are a little lighter, which I often find works better in printing. If you send something to a printer that's very highly contrasted, sometimes that can be exaggerated in the printing process, so you can just see how fuzzy the edges are in my photograph. But it's not bad. For minimum gear, just a tripod and good daylight, this was what I used to produce this. So I hope you find this helpful. I know the digital world is a bit of a minefield, but it's so important to both promote yourself online and also have the opportunity to put your work into print. So until next time,